experience with the program, and thrilled that you are recommending your colleagues to come join. So thank you. Obviously, I want to thank our Industry Advisory Council. So hands up for the Industry Advisory Council. Many of the panelists are with it, and in the audience, any IAC members or guests out here as well. Wonderful, thank you. So we have a panel of Industry Advisory Council is made up of executives from 18, 20 companies, mostly in the Boston area, made up of the Shires, the MITREs, the Treibers of the world. Awesome companies, and they give us guidance on, and Boston Scientific. So thank you for joining us. So tonight, we're going to kick off a panel talking about culture and careers, and some advice on what to look for in a company and what companies look for when hiring people. So I think with that, we're going to get this going. So introductions. Who am I? I'm Mark Benali. I'm Executive Director of the Gordon Institute. I'll be hosting it tonight, and we have a panelist. We have, what do we have, 6 out here? 1, 2, 3, 7 panelists. So we're going to start with Sean down here. Sean just came back from 8 days of backpacking in Kenya. All right, not bad. Next to him is Diane. Diane is a classically trained vocalist. Bob Treiber still lives in DU. It's a little known secret. He actually never left. And now has 2 sons living with him in the same house. All 3 of them play motocross too. He's a remarkably fast man. Let's say, moving on. So Lisa, this just scares me. Yours and John's insights just scared me. So Lisa is 17 marathons straight into an intended 25 straight goal at the Boston Marathon. Yeah. Totally impressive. I will not be competing for that goal. Nick is just back from a trip to the Grand Canyon. He's mentioned that he loves sunrise. He has to commute from the North Shore to work, so he, like many of you, when you graduate and get real jobs, you realize that you actually have to get there on time. So it's not like being a student anymore. And you do crazy things, like getting up at 5 in the morning to beat traffic and get to the office. It's a horrible, life is a horrible thing. Try to avoid it. Go back, come back to school, right? Stay, more graduate programs. Avoid this lifestyle. So Nick just had an opportunity, because he loves sunrises, to watch the sunrise from the south rim of the Grand Canyon. Took his young children down hiking somewhat. He said about 1.5 miles down.
As far as their little legs
go. Okay, yeah, 8-year-olds don't go that far. Right? Let's see, where am I next? Allison, up top. So Allison got into software development by hacking her first video game file. Is that what I understand? Okay.
Yeah, Ultima 4 was the game I was playing for those who play video games, and my save game got corrupted. I was having it, so I had to go back and reverse engineer it and get back to where I was.
So the hacker amongst us here. Okay. And John truly scares me here. John is a master class cyclist and has actually competed racing up Mount Washington and qualified in under 1 hour and 20 minutes for lifetime status in master cycling. If you've ever hiked Mount Washington, or if your car's got one of those little bumper stickers, it's gone up Mount Washington. It's terrifying. It's a full day hike. It is not something you do in 1 hour and 20 minutes, even in your car. So pretty impressive. So for panelists, thank you for joining us. So I'm going to get into my set of questions here that have been well organized for me. So we're going to start a little bit about culture. Culture is a term that's thrown around. It's kind of like if you don't have an accelerator in your basement, right? You're actually not a player, right? If you don't use the word ecosystem, at least 4 or 5 times in a meeting, right? You're really not you're not on top of your game. Culture is thrown around quite a bit as well. And what I want to ask the panel is your thoughts on how much you describe the culture of your company, and is there one? Is it a strong culture? Yes or no? Any thoughts on the role that culture plays in an organization? And we're gonna, and ask the entire panel to contribute on this. And so we'll start with Sean, or we can just, whoever wants to go first.
If anybody's super motivated to jump in, by all means. But yeah, I agree, Mark. I think culture is, it's a word that's used really loosely, really fluidly, really commonly, and I think it's interpreted very differently by lots of people. You know, one question that I think it gets asked kind of often, you know, what's the culture of your company? You know, does your company have a culture? I think it's important to understand how you define culture, because it's my belief that culture, in simple terms, is just the reflection of everybody's behavior when nobody's watching. And so, by definition, every company has a culture. You may want to change it, you may want to make it different than it is, but it's there. As long as you've got people, you've got a culture. The question is, what do you sort of want it to be? What do you want to do with it? Shire is a pretty sizable company. We're a global company, about 23,000 people. So we have some tenets held at the top of the house that are sort of intended to outline what the culture is. Within that, I work in technical operations. We've got about 15,000 people, also globally based. And so we've sort of layered in another piece that we use to define the culture of technical operations. What we're using it to do then is to really drive an understanding of what it is we aspire to be. And then we use that to sort of layer in what, sort of what we need the organization to do. So we're looking to establish a culture of supply excellence. And as a supply organization with a real focus on the patients and providing product, supply excellence is a real key contributor to that. And then we break that down into things that are a little bit more simple to understand and take action against. So I do think every company's got a culture. We've got one. We're working on evolving it to be something different than it is today.
So I work at Sonos, and we make speakers, so our culture is music. That isn't our written culture. We really have two kinds of cultures. There's the culture of the office, which is full of speakers playing music basically all of the time. There are tons of people in the company who are musicians professionally or on the side. The language of music and musicians is constant. We codename all of our products after artists and bands and albums, things like that. But that isn't our written culture. That's kind of just how we have been. We do have a very prescribed written culture that's on poster boards and around the office, which specifically collaboration, respect, transparency, and ownership. And those are very carefully selected words. I think the most interesting one about Sonos is transparency. It's actually, we actually refer to it sometimes as radical transparency. It is very easy at Sonos to know what any other team in the company is doing and why. Everyone talks about what they're doing at lunch with each other in the hallway, which is a little bit uncomfortable for people coming from larger companies. We're about 1,800 people now, which is starting to dip towards the larger size. So, but one of the things that I've actually had some comments from a colleague who came from Microsoft was, wow, you all have your calendar set to be visible. And that's the default for us. It never occurred to me that that was weird. But where he came from, everyone has their calendar set to be invisible. And you book a meeting with somebody, you don't really know if they're available or not. Here, not only do you know if they're available or not, you know exactly what they're doing. And you can decide for yourself if you think your thing is more important, and then they can tell you it's not. That's okay. And that's, I think, one of the most interesting parts of our culture.
So I'm Bob Treiber, Boston Engineering. Maybe I don't need this? No, sorry. So Boston Engineering, we definitely have a culture. You can guess it's an engineering culture. It's a very strong engineering culture. We're a small business, so we have a small business culture. We're about 70 people. I would say, to Sean's earlier point, your culture can be both an asset and a liability. Ours is an asset from an engineering standpoint. Something wrong with your car, there's 60 people in there that'll have an opinion on what's wrong with your car. But if you want to market something, you're on your own. So it can be both an asset and a liability. It's a consulting company, so it's a little bit of a pressure cooker, but it's very dominated by engineering think. And if you like that kind of stuff, it's great.
Hi, I'm Lisa Wyman. I work at a small biotech company called Mersana Therapeutics, and we don't have a really defined culture. We don't have slogans that are put on the wall. We're a pretty small company, about 80 people, and our culture is authentic. So I'm fairly new to the organization. I've been there 3 or 4 months, and when I think of who we are as a company, we're definitely mission focused. If you walk into our office at any time and ask anyone, like, what are you doing and why are you doing it? And we want to cure cancer. So we are scientists, we are physicians, we are postdocs, we are engineers who are truly passionate about advancing molecules in the clinic that will change the outcomes for cancer patients dramatically. So that's one thing that resonates with me for the culture. And the other one is we like feedback. We're not afraid to have hard conversations. And we wouldn't be able to accomplish our mission without having those honest conversations, right? Do we make this process change? Do we dose this to patients? Do we make this investment to move to a new, fancier office building? So we have these really open, candid, tough conversations that really bring out the best in who we are as scientists. They help us be better leaders and really push and challenge us to achieve our mission, to really change the landscape of cancer.
This is on, yeah, cool. So hi, I'm Svencer. I work at Augmenix. It was a small startup company. We're now kind of a commercial stage company. Like most, maybe all of you in the audience, I'm an engineer by training. Concept of culture, maybe didn't quite get it when I was sitting in your seats. But through this process of kind of growing the company to where we are now, it's been really cool to be part of the change of where we were and to be and where we wanted to go. And I think culture really fits into a lot of that. So for us personally, I think our company culture isn't on a wall, it's not a slogan or anything like that, but I think it's really trust, communication, openness, and really adhering to our core company values, which are actually in our coffee mugs. So it's kind of it's pretty standard stuff. Patient first, be the best, world-class service, constant improvement, and every day having those as our values, as corny as they sound a lot of times, help us as a management team fall back to when we're making really hard decisions about what we want to do with something. We literally turn a mug around and go, it's right there, the answer's right here. So it helps you kind of guide through those difficult to navigate waters.
I'm Allison. I'm Allison Perkel. I'm at Carbon Black, and culture is a very interesting word. I've been around with startups and engineering-focused ones and non-engineering-focused ones. They're all a little bit different. They're all pluses and minuses. I think, Nick, you hit it best. When you have a defined company culture, whether it's a few words on a wall or it's a mindset, the answer to your hard problems, you can actually slice and dice and say, this is the right thing to do because of our culture. When I look at Carbon Black, when I first got there, we were half the size we are now. And the defining statement was, we don't hire assholes, we treat each other with respect and honesty. And as we've grown, we realized that's great. It's a great starting point. We still don't hire assholes. We still treat each other with respect and with honesty. We're working on being more transparent, and we're now really working on developing a culture of constant learning and constant questioning, because we want that innovation to kind of percolate through our entire work, not just engineering, not just sales, not just marketing, everywhere. And that's kind of what, when I look at companies, when you have that culture that gives you those points to look at, it gives you a North Star to drive toward. And that's a huge thing to look for every single time you look at a company going, could I work there?
Hi, I'm John Wolfson from MITRE Corporation. MITRE is a non-for-profit. It's about 8,000 employees and has been around since the mid-50s. So it has a culture that's well established, very steeped. We work in the public service, basically to solve problems for a safer world. We're in the business of national security. Security comes in all different varieties. You think about it in terms of Department of Defense, but it can be food safety. We do a lot of work for the FAA in terms of collision avoidance, how to keep drones out of the airspace when we're coming into a landing. So that aspect of our culture that's been around since the company was formed in terms of public service, mission for the country, is ultimately what draws employees to the company and keeps them staying at the company, that sense of mission. I'd say beyond that, because we're an R&D firm, we're a think tank, so other aspects of our culture that's really emphasized is learning, innovation, and collaboration. People can't sort of work off on their own in the company. They've got to find different ways to connect with their colleagues, because increasingly the types of problems that we're working on now are very complex problems, and they bring a whole assortment of skill sets to the table in order to solve the problem. So, learning, collaboration, and innovation.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to turn this question first to Diane, then Sean. So all firms have culture of some form. Some are include written, right? Some are lived, right? Some are observed. When employees come into an organization that don't fit the culture, right, often it's a problem. So curious, Diane, your thoughts on what do you look for, what in terms of behaviors, attributes, when you're interviewing people to join your organization? How important is it to you to find people that fit your culture, that will work in harmony with it, and how do you go about doing that?
So that's actually a really tough question when you talk about interviewing people, because interviewing for culture can fall into a pit of interviewing for somebody exactly like me, which is something you don't want. You want to have diversity of your team. You want to have people who think differently than you, who look differently than you, with different backgrounds. So you can't fall into, I'm interviewing for somebody who thinks just like I do, and therefore they're part of my culture. So I would say always look out for somebody who says, oh, I liked them, but they weren't a culture fit. Ask them why. Now, I will say that if I'm talking to somebody that is only really wants to talk about the actual technology behind the product and has no interest whatsoever in the customers, in the users, and in listening, listen out loud is another one of the things we posted on a wall at some point. That's a better explanation for me about what I mean by not meeting our culture, is they're not interested in what we're building. Or they're not, if there's somebody who's not, who doesn't feel like they're being respectful to the person on the other side of the table, like that's, certainly we wouldn't hire somebody who has that. And so you're trying to look for behaviors in people without explicitly looking for somebody who's exactly like you.
Sean, you got a different take on that?
Complimentary take, I think, Diane. So I actually think, as we went down the road, part of what was, for me, just really interesting is you can see both the necessity and the value of culture depending on where your company is in its life cycle. If you get a company of 50 people, you can sit them in a room and you look them all in the eye and you can explain things very clearly to them, and you can ask questions and answer questions, and you will see people routinely. And so, being able to establish that culture, it's an advantage. As you scale that, it becomes a little bit more codified. It becomes the words on the mug and the posters on the wall, because you're trying to communicate that, you're trying to replicate that, and you're trying to help people understand it. But in terms of this question mark, I think the I think what's interesting for me about that, so we do have cultural elements in Shire. They're very strong. Patients at the center of everything we do. It's a very mission-driven company in that sense. We do have a complementary culture on the supply side of mutual accountability, continuous improvement, and a learning organization, and those things are important. One of the things that I'm really focused on when I talk to candidates or people who are considering coming into the company, I want them to be aware of the environment in which that culture lives, sort of the business context that we're in. In Shire, we operate quickly. You have to be ready, able, willing, capable of handling change, a significant pace of change and directional change. I spent the last 2 months preparing to spin off the oncology division, and I had a meeting today that made me late because there's another company considering buying us. And so, there is a significant, culture of change and a pace of change that permeates the organization. We don't have that written on the wall, but that's one of the things that when I'm talking to somebody, I really want to make sure that they understand the environment and the business context, within which we operate, because I think that's really important for them to understand, to make an informed decision about whether or not they want to join the team.
Great, thank you. Any other panelists want to jump in on that subject? Things you look for, or ways you look for cultural fits, or that you don't?
Yeah, I think when I'm interviewing somebody, it's not always, are you technically savvy, there's a lot of people out there that have the technical skill set. It's really, it's not matching me in my feelings or my philosophies. It's somebody that I feel like I can have a real discussion with around the product or the next challenge that we're going to come up with, that I know is confident to challenge the norms when needed, but as well as, not rock the boat when it's unnecessary, kind of a thing. I think there are difficult things to tease out in an interview, but I think things like, how do you balance your work life? What do you do outside of the office? Those are all things like if you can manage time and do lots of different things in your life, and you're not just going home and sitting in front of the TV. And that, I think it's important. I think that's it says a lot about how you approach your day and how you can be organized and efficient and be willing to work really hard in the office. So I think there's just different things outside of the standard, kind of questions of what did your last project and things like that that you worked on.
So, kind of riffing a little bit on that, one of the things that we started doing is doing more behavior-based interviews, where you begin to ask about past behaviors and asking why they did that, how that happened. That goes to what was being talked about earlier on what diversity of thought. You don't want to lead out culture to be groupthink, because that's the worst thing you get. When people think of like your company is get out, just go, door, out, don't stay. That behavior interview piece, you'll see that more if you haven't already, because it's gaining more and more traction as a way to get what they do by what they've done, and to give you more prediction of how they're going to be or how you're going to be. You ready for that?
I was just going to add that one of the really important things is a fit for the mission of the company. So, as I had indicated, we're a not-for-profit, we're a think tank. Certainly if a candidate comes in, they may have just the right technical skills that we're looking for, but if their aspiration is to bring a product to market, we're going to be the wrong company for them. And then we look for evidence that a candidate has in terms of how they've worked on teams, getting to the collaboration, or what did you have to learn in a certain project assignment or whatnot that shows how they go about the whole learning process. That's so important to our company.
Thank you. I'm going to flip the coin on that. So companies are obviously one half of the hiring process, but obviously as potential employees, right, you're looking for organizations that you're going to connect with the mission, and obviously look for organizations where you're going to be cultural fit. So let me ask, and I'll start with Lisa on this. So when you considered making a move to a new company, what is it you did to identify if it was the right cultural fit for you, if the organization you were joining was something that you would align with?
Yeah, my decision to leave Shire was a pretty personal one, because I was actually happy in my role, and I was kind of at a moment where I was taking some time to look at what are my next steps from a career perspective. So one thing that I did, I took a step back and said, what are my career values? Excuse me, like what's my career value proposition? So what do I want in my role, or what do I look for in my next employer? So one, I'm passionate about leading people and teams, so I want to be part of an organization where I could continue to lead. I wanted to be part of an organization where leadership was authentic. I could be myself. My coworkers could bring their true self to work. And then how decisions are made in an organization is important to me. So how leaders make good, bad decisions, and how that information is shared with employees. So I thought of some guiding principles or values in choosing my next role. And then obviously, you need to find the right location for your job, the right title, the right pay. So once those were kind of aligned, I would step into the interview process. And I was very specific about making sure that my next role and next opportunity met my personal values, which I just shared with you, but I also asked specific questions. So, when I met with different people that were either my peers or executive management or HR, I would say, what is the biggest frustration in your role today? Like, what is the one thing you don't like about working at Mersana? And I kind of asked those direct, pointed questions to different people at different levels of the organization. I was very observant when I walked through the hallways. Are people talking to my to-be boss, who's like the COO of the company? Are people talking to each other? How are people interacting when I was walking through the lab? So I was very in tune to the activities that were going on around me. And then on the personal side, like, what is the company doing to connect with patients or doctors in the oncology space? So that level of corporate or social responsibility was important to me because I want to be part of an organization that is engaged with their community. So I did a little bit of homework prior to that, looking at social media, like their Twitter account, LinkedIn, Instagram, to see like where are these employees spending their free time working at Mersana but not in their day job. And then looked at some history and bios of the executive team because I want to make sure that the leadership team that I'm working for is really connected and aligned. They like each other. They have diverse experiences. They're diverse from an ethical background as well as gender. And so I asked a lot of really direct and kind of blunt questions that I probably wouldn't have asked in a job interview 7 years ago. And I was able to find out if it was a right fit. And then also my hiring manager, I was like wavering a little bit when the offer letter came, and I said, hey, would you have some time to meet with me on a Saturday afternoon? And it was like the Saturday of Halloween. And he's like, yeah, if you want to meet anytime on Saturday, let me know the time and the location. And I met him at a coffee shop, and he's like, I blocked my calendar off from 2 to 9 p.m. So if you want to stay here and ask me any question about working for me, working at Mersana, I'm here. And so I felt like the investment in bringing me on as employee and having that focused time was something that was really unique in my career search. So there was a lot of things that indicated it would be a right fit.
That's wonderful. It doesn't surprise me you went through that rigorous process. I would encourage everyone listening to consider this, but most people don't do this. At least it's not like most people. Nick, I think we have you slotted to take a shot at this one as well.
Yeah, sure. I think, again, as I've now gone through the process of sort of helping build this organization and moving offices and really being able to fit out a new office from the ground up, I think your point about walking around and seeing how people are interacting is huge. You can learn a lot by just observing as you walk around these different offices. And I guess one other note, culture isn't, the same culture isn't for everyone. Just the culture that I've decided that I would like at my organization and I want to build, it might not be right for somebody else out here. But for me, it's great. I love when I walk in the morning, I'm usually there first, but when people start to show up, you can feel the energy in the room kind of grow, and people are engaged, they're excited to be there, and you can feel that in an office. And you can, whenever you walk in for an interview, you can tell if people are kind of moping around and heads down in a cube and aren't really engaged. You can feel if the office is designed to be set up collaboratively, if it's set up in an open space. Are the executives cornered off in one area, or are they involved? Are they at equal level of offices? I mean, there's little cues that you can kind of get to see whether, what kind of culture the company is really founded upon. I think the honesty thing goes both ways. I think you want to have them, when you ask a question to them, really a pointed question like something like you just proposed, hearing and looking at their body language and seeing, do you really believe what they're saying, or are they just towing the company line right now to try to get you on board? I think that's something you kind of have to trust your gut a little bit these decisions. And you know, you're all valuable assets that companies are looking to get. So, you know, you have a little, remember that you do have some sway in those things.
Absolutely. Any other panelists want to take a shot at this one? Yeah, please, Bob.
So kudos to you folks for being here to learn about culture. I didn't know anything about culture until I found myself in a culture in which I didn't fit, and that was a disaster. My wife will tell you it was the worst time in my life. I considered myself a pretty good engineer, and I wound up in a company that didn't value precision or detail-oriented or timeliness or right angles or what, you know, all the things that I want buttoned down. I just didn't fit, and it was miserable. I would add, and now as an interviewer, I find it difficult to figure out whether someone's going to fit, because as an interviewer, we walk a pretty fine line not being discriminatory in these questions. And so when you're trying to figure out someone's culture, you could be figuring out something about their personality, which you better be careful, that could be discriminatory. So I put it on you folks, the interviewee, to figure out if this is a cultural fit for you. Often when I'm interviewing somebody and I don't think I'm doing a good job, I just try to scare them and try and, look, this is how we're going to be. If this is for you, fine. And I often tell them, look, we're looking for marriages. We're looking for people that are going to fit here. And so I would encourage you guys to take a hard look when you're interviewing, the onus is upon you. And I'll just tell you a quick story. We had a new hire show up. We have a company meeting once a week, once a month. Sean mentioned it earlier. You can get everybody in the conference room when you're a small company. And we had a company meeting, and a couple of people told me afterwards that the new hire had a puzzled look on her face when our company meeting started going with the company stuff that we do. And 7 days later, she wasn't there. She resigned. So fit is very important.
That's great. Any other shots at this, or please?
To build on what everyone has said so far, you can say no. If somebody offers you a job and you don't think you'll fit there, you can say no.
Probably the best
Remember
advice.
to negotiate.
Yeah.
And negotiate. Absolutely.
I actually
Never take the first offer.
I actually think all of those points I think are really critical, right? And I think whether it's a marriage or a recognition that it's a relationship, or that not every environment is ideal for everyone. And I think one of the things that is harder to realize, everybody here has been working for a little bit longer than you guys, right? So we've made the mistakes, and we've not thought things through, and we've experience is knowledge you need right after you needed it, right? Well, there's a little bit of experience sitting in front of you, and I think one of the things that I learned a while ago was it's important to know what you like. The company will know what the company likes. The manager will know what the manager likes. What do you like? What do you like to do? What's the environment that you want to spend your time in? What's the vibe? Right? Because look, at the end of the day, we get paid, right? So it is a job, it's work, but you're going to do it for a while. Like where you do it. So think about what you like. And I think Lisa's points about, and your points as well, Nick, about looking, like when you walk around, what's going on? What do you see in front of you? It's like going into a bar or a restaurant. What do? You look around, and is this the kind of bar you want to hang out in? No, it's not my scene. You go to the next bar. Honestly, like it's that, like you're going to spend a lot of time in that environment. Think about it, right? It's you have options.
John?
The only thing I was going to add is, often as a candidate, you can ask to put yourself in the environment of, say, a project team, spend 2 or 3 hours hanging out with the project team. In fact, I have one department in our organization that gave a really good candidate kind of a homework assignment to say, okay, I think this looks like potentially a promising match. This is right in your wheelhouse. We've got a project meeting tomorrow. Show up with something and be part of the meeting. And they did. They probably spent some hours that evening, putting some work together. They joined the project team. They got to be right in the mix of the team, so they're, figuring out how you actually get a real glimpse inside the company as if you were a member of the team and the organization. That's key.
Kind of referencing several things. Don't be afraid to ask. That's really the key thing here. Don't be afraid to ask. Because most times, being on the other side, I'm like, I never thought of that. That's brilliant. Like, my God, yeah, of course. And that will happen more than you think. We might have more experience, but we don't know anymore.
This is just fantastic advice. And so, quickly, one, you don't have to accept the offers. Two, it is a marriage. You don't want to be leaving a company 2 weeks after you join it because it just doesn't feel right, from values and cultures and behavior. So absolutely, as you're going through this process, right, the onus is on you to figure out where you want to work. You're way too valuable to go someplace where you're not loving it. And I promise you, if you find yourself someplace where you're not loving it, you won't succeed. And so just move on until you find the place that you love. It doesn't feel like work when you're loving it.
And negotiate.
And negotiate, especially the women in the crowd, right? Which I think is fantastic. Both of you comment on this, right? We've seen studies that women don't negotiate as much as men do, right? So please, right, negotiate. Okay, I'm going to move a slightly different question here, but on the same general subject. So hiring is a two-way process, right? So companies are looking for people that are fit. They got the skills, the culture, the attitude to come in and be a part of the norms of the organization. You're looking for a good fit, but then you show up on the job. And now you really got to figure out how to read the tea leaves, right? You got to figure out how to fit in and have an impact right away. So with that, I'm going to go to Allison first and then to Bob, and we'll open it up to the rest. So for new hires, advice on how do you figure out the tea leaves of the organization such that you hit the ground running when you get there?
No, you're not going to hit the ground running. Just know that. Point blank. I can only speak for the organizations that I've helped build and been involved in, is that we're trying very hard to make sure you're successful. We know that there's going to be missteps and miscues. And one of the great changes in the past, I'd say 10, 12 years, is this idea of fast feedback, where if something happens, your teammate, your manager, your team lead, your architect, I'm very engineering focused here, will pull you aside and say, hey, by the way, maybe think about this. In fact, I have one person, who's 2 years out now. It's been kind of a pet project of mine because his future is super high and I'm trying to help him reach that potential, whatever that potential for him may be. I'll pull him aside if I see him do something in a meeting, or pull him, hey, you should go to this meeting, ask to be there. This is something that's in your wheelhouse and you can provide value for it. So, yeah, people will be around you to help you. Most places will assign a buddy. Use that buddy. Take advantage of that person to help you navigate the initial forays through it. And it never hurts to ask. Ask your manager in a one-on-one, hey, how am I doing? Ask your teammates, hey, does this make sense? Did what I just do follow? And if you're attuned enough to watch people's reactions, if you see folks with their feet toward you, you're doing fine. If their feet are like this, stop talking, let them walk away. And then ask later on, did I say something to offend you, or something along those lines, because maybe they started running someplace, but that's also a way to kind of figure out, like, if you're kind of fitting in culture, do we want to be with you or run away? And it's sad, but that really does work a lot, actually.
Bob, you take a shot at this?
Those are very good advice, good answers. A tough question for us. That is a serious problem at Boston Engineering, because as I said earlier, we are mostly engineers and a very introverted bunch. So when a new hire starts, that poor person could be in that cube for months without anybody talking. So fortunately, one of the engineering managers did come up with a good idea, which was to take the new person out to lunch, which is pretty cool, as opposed to what I hate is going away lunches. Why are we giving someone who's leaving us a going away party, but whatever. I think what Allison said, though, is very important that I would reiterate, is ask. If you can't ask, that means you're afraid of the answer. So you should ask for feedback when you get there. If it's a small company, I think it's probably easier in that there's no real place to hide. You're going to run into folks in the hallway. If it's a larger company, it may be easy too, because the law of large numbers may dictate, so you may run into people there as well. But I do think it's very important to manage your own career. So it's up, again, I'm going to put it, because I'm usually the hirer, I'm going to put it back on the interviewees. But you have to manage your own career. You have to get off to a running start, because you don't want to have a bad review in 30 days or 90 days or whatever it is. And don't be afraid, and never be afraid to make a mistake. So go ask the tough question, and you'll get a good answer.
And you want to take a shot at this, or?
Well, I mean, I'm kind of living this now. I've been at Mersana for about 4 months, and it's hard to be new. So don't get discouraged. It takes about 6 months to transition into a new role, into a new company, and just acknowledge that it's hard. And one thing that I recommend to do is to listen to others. Don't get caught up in the company gossip or the stereotypes that you hear about a certain group or a certain person. Go with an open mind, and for those 6 months, just really focus on learning about the company, learn about the people, make connections, build your network in a new company, and just recognize that it's going to be awkward, uncomfortable. You're not going to have your go-to person for lunch, and just get comfortable in that awkward space for 6 months, and people will start to trust you as you show interest in their work and interest in them as people.
Just maybe to build on Lisa's point, because I think it's really important when you stole that. But I think one thing that I'd recommend, whether it's the first week, the first 2 weeks, the first month, the first 2 months, it's a little counterintuitive, because when you start a new job, what you want to do is be awesome at your job, and you want to dig into it, whatever it is, and you want to demonstrate value, and you want to get things done, you want to show your boss that you're making progress, and that's appropriate. The other thing is, though, a couple of months down the road, you're going to be part of the organization, and that work is going to become your way routinely. You will be a known entity, you will be part of the fabric. That first period of time, however long it is your opportunity to look up and out. Learn about what's going on around you. Learn about the jobs around your job. How does your job fit in? Right? Everybody makes something, whatever it is. It's part of a system. It's part of an environment. What comes to you, and where does your stuff go? How do the departments work? Right? How do things get done? Because that's going to make you being able to do your job a lot easier if you've actually got an understanding of that. 6 months down the road, you're going to take it all for granted. You're going to assume, when you're 2 weeks in, 3 weeks in, it's all new. You don't have any bias. So look, learn, read, talk, get to know what's going on around you.
Can I build that one? Please. You just remind me of something that I started doing about 12 years ago. About 6 weeks in, I asked every new hire, what is good that we're doing and what is bad that we're doing, for that very reason you just talked about. So it's also a chance to give back and help tweak here and there, but spot on.
And I can't really more the ask. Just keep asking. If you have questions, ask. It's scary. You got a new boss, you have a new environment, you don't know who's around you really. You barely even know the guy sitting next to you, or the woman sitting next to you. Ask a question. People are happy to help out. A lot of times people get busy in their own jobs, and they forget that you don't know what you're doing, and it's a hurdle that you have to overcome. So just ask, and people are more than happy to help out. And if they're not, then you probably don't want to talk to me anyways.
It's cool to finish it.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, got it. So I'm going to jump. We're going to pass my favorite question. Okay, yeah, 10 minutes, great. So we're going to stick with my favorite question. Slightly change the subject. So Clay Christensen has done a bunch of studies on corporations, and one of the things that he's learned is that innovative companies, right, innovative leadership teams and the people tend to hire innovative people, often to the detriment of execution. So the culture is focused on innovation, not execution. And leadership teams that are execution-centric tend to hire execution-centric people to the detriment of innovation. Well, that's one kind of cultural challenge. And another cultural challenge we're living through right now is that companies that have been established for decades or hundreds of years in some cases sometimes are faced with changing cultures in workforce. Millennials today certainly are coming to the workforce with a different set of behaviors than we did back in the 70s, 80s. So in these cases, organizations in both cases have to consider changing the cultures of their organizations, or not. So I want to open this up to that background, to Sean and to John. Thoughts on efforts that your companies may have put in place to change culture in the face of an effort to improve performance.
I'm dying to hand the microphone here.
Go ahead, Sean.
No, it's okay. So your turn? Okay. Yeah, so I was talking to Andre before the meeting got started. I would be, not by design, but by happenstance, pretty familiar with cultural change management. In the last 10 years, I was with, so I've worked and lived in a number of different countries. I've worked and lived in a number of different states. You'll see culture and change there. We'll get back to the innovation and performance thing, or execution thing in a second, sorry. But I've also worked at Wyeth when we were acquired by Pfizer. I worked at Genzyme when we were acquired by Sanofi. I worked at Perkel when we were acquired by Shire. There's an ongoing conversation about Takeda. I've bought and sold plants and products and things like that. And so I'm pretty familiar with the need to stay focused on sort of the design intent of the culture, what you really believe is the essence of the company, but also acknowledging that things need to change. And I think one of the things that that I can speak to specifically, that we're working on now, and I mentioned it before, this idea of a continuous improvement culture. It feels very stupid to say that people wouldn't want to make things better. Why would you want to do something that's inefficient? Or why would you want to manage a process or do a job where the things are broken? Like, you should just fix them, right? Oddly, I work in a highly regulated industry, and one of the things that's really important to us is compliance. And so we have a very high quality standard. And one of the things that we need to do is to achieve balance and to help people recognize that quality and compliance aren't necessarily just sort of blind adherence to rules, and that this idea of continuous improvement and making things better can be done, and actually in the service of a good compliance posture, that's a thing that you want to do. But you're right, Mark, it's an important attribute of the culture of the company to be able to help people understand how to balance those two things. Sometimes you just have to be overt about it, and continue to educate people, give them the skills and the capabilities they need to be able to do both those things in harmony.
Thank you. John, take a shot at this.
Yeah, so I guess from a culture standpoint, again, going back to our company, we're not-for-profit in the public interest. We work for the government. One of the things that is deeply ingrained in the company is a very collaborative environment. What that can cause, though, is slowness in making decisions. You work for the government, that's inherently slow. And you work in an environment where there's a lot of discussion, there's looking at trade space and that type of thing. And our new CEO and the board really appropriately said, we're going after some problems where either the problems or the solutions can be very fleeting. We've got to get faster at going after those particular problems and more agile as an organization. And so that's been a bit of an experiment over the last years, to take an organization that's very steeped and say, okay, we got to be a lot faster in certain areas for some of these problem spaces that we're in. And how do you get the culture of the whole company now behind that? Now, it turns out new hires, they don't bring in that steeped culture. They bring in a fresh set of eyes, perspective, and experience. So that actually works to our advantage. But probably the biggest thing that we've really had to focus on is getting the organization locally in project teams and in groups to be willing to take on more risk, to try things that may not, lead to a solution that we can bring to our clients. So we are a company on one hand with a very steeped culture, and on the other hand, really trying to introduce a couple of new aspects.
While I also have opinions about the innovation versus execution things, I've watched Sonos try to add more execution to an innovation culture. And I'll just say it's hard because change is hard. I react strongly to millennials these days. I'm a little bit a stereotype of millennial these days, except for that I'm not quite young enough, close. And here's some advice to y'all millennials these days. Don't listen when people call you a millennial. It doesn't freaking matter. You can just turn around and tell them, oh, Gen Xers these days. It doesn't matter. It's a label. It has nothing to do with who you are.
Where do you want to go with that?
Mic drop. All right, so, okay. Do we have time for Q&A, or we wrap it up? I probably didn't make much time.
Yeah. I mean, maybe we should go right to Q&A.
Okay,
and
got
then,
it.
Yeah.
So at this point, we're going to open it up for some Q&A.
5 minutes.